hit it off the top with the biggest event in PF Elator / Smart Cage history. Went down in Saudi Arabia on Saturday. Battle of the Giants was the PFL Super Fights pay-per-view offering, and one giant stood tall over the rest. Francis Ngannou, some 33 months removed from the MMA cage, 7 months removed from Anthony Joshua knocking out his lights, and unfortunately just a handful of months removed from the untimely death of his 15-month-old son. All of that came together for Francis in his return against Renan Ferreira, the PFL Heavyweight Super Fight Championship on the line, but that wasn't the story. It took less than a round, but good old Francis turned into Brock Lesnar against Frank Mir, delivering the first-round TKO, an emotional interview afterwards. Luke Thomas, first and foremost here, forget PFL for a second. This one's about Francis. What's your biggest takeaway from Saturday?
He had a triumphant moment, I think, in his return to MMA. And we really only talked about what it meant that he was coming off of the terrible, tragic loss to his, tragic loss, I should say, of his son.
Sure.
And then the terrible professional loss, not that they are equivalent, but the professional loss to Anthony Joshua. But BC, when you think about it, there was actually more than that. I mean, really, Francis was the face of this entire thing. Like, the only reason why it was the biggest card in PFL history is because Francis, who is still the lineal heavyweight champion of MMA, was on it. He did most of the promotion for it. He did and featured in most of the spotlight for it wherever you began to see it. So there were those two things before. Then there's the pressure of, like, to what extent is this going to be an event that people care about? That was on Francis. This was Francis's first MMA fight since getting knee surgery. I know we'd seen him in 2 boxing fights, but wrestling is a different kind of toll on your orthopedic joints. So there was that as well. And I can go and list other features all down the line, still dealing with UFC detractors, still dealing with negativity in the press.
Still kind of fighting Dana publicly in a sense, right?
In a sense, yes. And nevertheless went in there and turned in what I would call, like, wasn't enough of a performance against enough of a foe to be something spectacular. I can't say that. But it was a clear demonstration that despite some of these difficulties, hurdles, accumulated pressures around him, that he is still very much the man in charge.
Yes.
He is still very much capable of beating what I would call Renan Ferreira a limited but good fighter, still plenty capable of beating that, and then some. We'll get to his future. I'm sure you're going to ask about that, and we will talk about it. But to be able to have a moment to get over the Joshua loss, I don't know what the business returns are going to be, but in terms of what he could provide the broadcast and the event, I think he did just about everything he could do. You could make that argument. He performed as ably as he possibly could, and I think did so very, very well. There was a couple of details with that crab hook where he was going for the ground and pound. There were nice little details you could see in his game, especially the ground game.
So you would say 33 months he wasn't not working on any MMA?
No, it seemed like the people were asking, like, what was the value of this win? Because Ferreira is limited on the ground. There is no denying that. But I would say that the answer is, even if he is limited in those spots, and he is, had Francis lost to somebody like this, it would have told you that maybe the core of his game is beginning to degrade.
Yes.
It is not degrading. It is not. He is still going to beat very good fighters in the state that he's in, and potentially, depending on what matchups could arrive his way, some really good ones. I don't know. But I just want to point out, being able to exorcise the demons that had been following him, not that this one event does it all together, but I'm sure it will help in the healing process. Being able to finally talk more openly about your child.
Sure.
And in a way where he can be praised and acknowledged and adored and loved even from afar. To be able to have, again, a win, a triumphant moment that he hadn't had a winning moment in quite some time. I think all this was good for Francis. I think in general it was quite good for PFL. And I don't know where we go next, but it was a fun little moment in the heavyweight division's history.
I mean, when we talked about the make or break elements of this card for PFL, even though we're rightfully focusing on Francis to start here, we were arguing, like, is this really a make or break? Is there anything that can happen here positively or negatively that can demonstrably change? I think the one thing that we said was, what if Francis comes in here, looks good, and do what we think he's capable of? And he did that. He came in there, didn't take any damage, felt him around a little bit on the feet, took him down, and took him apart. At least it keeps alive the idea, should PFL lean on that from a marketing sense, and they probably, as we said last week, should have played up more the idea that they have the lineal heavyweight champion, the best heavyweight in the world. This still keeps alive, if they want to play that card, the idea that we have the best heavyweight champion. Hey, UFC, you have the best fighter of all time who happens to be your heavyweight champion. Let's break all the rules and do a cross promotion. If Francis goes in there and loses or looks old or what have you, that conversation's off the table. At least that's still in place for whatever that's worth and wherever that can lead to. But going back to the personal story of Francis, I mean, this just proves how different he is, how special he is, that he can endure not just that incredible journey to get to France to even begin his combat sports career, not just endure the ridiculous soap opera with UFC while his knee's torn up and go in there and unify the championship against Gane over 5 rounds by wrestling, but can take this time off, go through these setbacks, and still prove when it's time he's a fucking gamer, that he's still the man.
I saw people on social media say, like, Francis, he always comes out on top. That's actually not true. He doesn't always come out on top. There are times, in fact, this bout, part of the reason why it was significant was because more recently, again, personally and privately, things have been going very poorly for him. But the reality is he doesn't win every time, but he doesn't ever let failure, setback, devastation even define his circumstances.
Yes.
That's what I would say.
He's still more inspiring of a character in these combat sports than ever before. I mean, it's just wild.
I don't think this pay-per-view card is going to sell well, and there might be some questions about what Francis's appeal is in a world where he didn't sell well. And again, he's coming off of a knockout loss. He's coming off of a horrific personal tragedy. Those are things that will hurt you and set you back and devastate your life. And yet, he is still able, when the time is right, to take control of things and then reassert himself in a dominant way. I think that's, to me, what I got out of Saturday, at least from the Francis Ngannou side.
For sure.